Hi, I'm Kevin Ellerton, the founder of Meditation Magazine, and I'm here with Reggie Hubbard. Hey Reggie, how you doing?
Kevin, great. And you?
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm getting over a cold. You'll hear it in my voice. Maybe I'll cough a few times, or maybe I'll have to stop and blow my nose. And I'm still also a little bit hazy. There was like a few days there, over the weekend, where I wasn't getting more than like 3 or 4 hours a night of sleep.
Right.
Last night I got good sleep, so hopefully I'll be relatively coherent today.
All right.
So, yeah, I want to just introduce Reggie to our audience. Reggie is he's the founder of Active Peace Yoga, and I've listened to his story. Basically, he started out as sort of an activist and trying to create social change and social justice, and then and then he got into yoga and meditation and spirituality, and was eventually able to sort of fuse the two and bring them together. And now I believe you work with people in Capitol Hill and political leaders to try to help them spiritually, and also to help uh, their mindset and grow in a positive way. So am I getting that mostly right, Reggie? Do you want to correct anything there?
Yeah. So it's a blessing to be with you, Kevin, and here's to your health. So even
Thank
in the
you.
course of our conversation, may your health be restored.
Thanks.
Um, yeah, I've been an activist for about 25 years and a yoga meditator, yogic practitioner and meditative practitioner for about 12 or so. So I help, especially now, given our current conditions, there are a lot of people in Washington and other activist spaces that just don't have the tools to manage the complexity and the chaos of the moment. I mean, I had one person tell me recently, Reggie, I can't drink my way through this one. I'm like, I hope to see you in class, right? Like, I hope to see you in meditation or sound class, because I've been beating this drum for about 10 years or so in the political space. And now people are finally understanding, hey, yeah, there's another way to deal with this other than like chain smoking or drinking or all these other things. The other thing I would say to that is that for meditative practitioners or yogic practitioners who are looking for a voice of inclusion and social justice, I speak to them. You know, a lot of times in yogic and meditative places, they're like, I want to not have an opinion, or I want to be non-dual, these sorts of things. The human experience, as in my lived experience, I don't have the luxury of being non-dual when there are legislative and political systems that seek to erase my very existence,
Mm.
based on the color of my skin. I had a conversation with someone recently where they were just like, "Isn't a meditative or a yoga place a place for someone to find common ground with someone?" I was like, "Not if the supposition is that my existence is lesser than yours."
Mm.
I don't seek common ground there. You know what I mean? I offer prayers for compassion. I offer prayers for peace for them. But if your philosophy of existence means that mine isn't worth it, I peace be with you, right? But
Yeah.
I don't really agree with that.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And we're gonna get into some of this stuff. I think what you were talking about with how people in the meditation and spiritual community want to be, I don't want to have an opinion. I want to be non-dual. I think actually something that I've been struggling with in making the current issue. So
Hmm.
for a little context, the peace issue was our last issue in 2024. And that was, I realized at the end of 2023 and early 2024, like the issue that we needed to make was the peace issue because of what was
Right.
going on in the world at
Hmm.
that time. It's still, unfortunately, a lot of it is still going on. It's maybe even some of somewhat worse.
Yeah.
But that was sort of the vibe of 2024, and what it needed. Um, 2025, I'm looking at what this year needs and what this moment needs, and I am actually I've been confused for the past few months trying to figure out what this moment needs. I In the peace issue, it was very, you could say, leaning toward non-dual, but also looking at what needs to help, what needs to happen for people to really live in just peace, not just
Totally.
quiet, to be able to fix the systems of oppression and things like that, but at the same time to not create more discord and conflict between sides, when there's good
Totally.
people on both sides trying to make things better in different conflicts. We covered a lot of different conflicts in that issue, including like in the Middle East and Africa and even in our country a little bit, just touching on our country.
Right.
And this issue for 2025, I believe it needs to really get into what's going on in our country, in the United States, because this is some crazy stuff that's going on right now.
Yep.
It's some crazy stuff. It's big changes, to say the least. It's massive change, and some people see that change as positive, and some people see that change as negative. Some people see it as the end of our democracy. Some people see it as moving into a golden age of limited government and more freedom. And I can understand what people are saying in both sides, except sometimes I get very confused when people are like very against DEI, for example.
Right.
And that's something that to me is like, why? Like, and I try to understand their perspective, and I'm still not fully getting it. So, and I think that that's an interesting topic to talk to you about. I think that as somebody that, you seem to support, affirmative action and DEI policies and stuff like that. And I have supported those, and I still support those. And when I see the arguments against it, I don't fully get the arguments against it. Maybe we can talk it through a little.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen. Oh yeah, I wanted to watch that Don Lemon interview with Elon, but I forgot to watch it. I was sick. Where he kind of talked about like how Elon talks about how he thinks that DEI policies are a form of like reverse racism or something like that.
Whatever. Right.
I don't know. What do you think about this? Do you think that there is any kind of real rationale or justification for like attacking DEI policies, or do you think that it's just misguided, or do you think it's actually just like racism that's trying to justify itself? Like, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of those things. So one, I appreciate that, like we talked about in pre-production, we're just going to talk about real things. Like I'm your guy for that. So I think those that attack DEI, even those who seem to have well intentions of we want it to be equal for everyone, miss the fundamental truth that the founding of these United States of America was done so at the expense of indigenous people, was done on the backs of enslaved humans, and was done for the preservation of an ideology that perpetuates even until this day. And that is, if someone has a skin that is lighter than mine, they are inherently better and more deserving of life than I am. That is the basic fundamental premise of all of these things. That is, and even those who say that it's not that don't have facts to support that it's not that.
Yeah.
So
I see the same thing, that it to me, when I listen to
it's
people
delusion.
talking about, when I hear people talking about that DEI is making things worse, and well, okay, they do have certain arguments like that, for example, if there is DEI as a policy in the country, if there's if you hire people based on race, then how do you know that somebody really earned their position, that somebody really got into that prestigious university? I do hear arguments,
but what they neglect to ask is, what if someone didn't deserve that position? What if someone didn't deserve the position and they were white? You know what I mean? Like, what about the nepotism that exists in corporate boards? What about the nepotism? I mean, I went to Yale undergrad. What about the nepotism that exists there, that people got in simply because they have a lighter hue and their families got money, right? So affirmative action, quite candidly, has been happening for white people for quite some time. And when, in fact, the whole goal of affirmative action is to make the field level, that's when people got mad, because like the game has been that like a certain group accrues all the benefit. So if it's a zero-sum game and someone who has nothing has something, and you who have everything loses something, it's a loss. But from a more holistic sense, it's just making things level, based on centuries of racism and sexism as a foundation of the policy of this country.
Yes, I see that people are missing. It seems like they're missing the systemic racism aspect, and the historical mistreatment and oppression of certain
erasure and murder.
groups. Of minorities, yes. So I just want to mention, anybody who's watching, feel free. You can comment. You can, say hi. We can try to bring you into the conversation as you watch. Just make sure you can feel free to interact. So, Reggie, yeah, when I see people missing that systemic racism aspect, I just kind of want to like ask them, like, do you not realize this? And but I don't think Elon. I don't even think I reached out to him because I'm pretty sure that's like a very long shot for an interview.
You never know
I
these
probably
days.
should. You never know,
Yeah,
right?
go for it.
Um,
He
but
claims to meditate.
yeah. Oh, he does. Oh, I
Hmm.
didn't know that. Maybe I'll reach out and try and see if I can ask him these questions. I wanted to see if Don Lemon asked him. I think I saw in Don Lemon was kind of asking him along these lines, and Elon got very defensive.
Yeah, and
And I wonder, like, I wonder if it comes down to like like a emotional like attachment to like racist ideologies and not wanting to give that up. I
well,
wonder if that.
there's a basic thing, and this is what I mean. This is where yoga and dharmic practice and meditative practice have helped me, because the majority of my life I have been vehemently against people who are against me. You're coming after me, then I'm going after you. I've moderated that to some extent in recent years, especially as my yogic and meditative practices have expanded, because I understand psychologically and spiritually that if you have a belief system that was a lie in the first place and it is falling apart before your very eyes, and it's the only thing that you have been shown to believe as the truth, that you want to protect that. Totally understand that. And so I, as such, have compassion for those for whom their worldview is disintegrating before their eyes, and they're seeking to do the impossible, which is stop time and limit human progress, right? Like, I have compassion for the futility in those efforts. I also have no compassion for the perpetuation of delusion, which is a core tenet of suffering as articulated in yogic and Buddhist texts. Right. So, like, if your worldview is perpetuated upon delusion, I, as a servant of truth and peace, am meant to disrupt that.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that's great, and that kind of brings me into this sort of question that I have in my mind, which is, how do we know what is true and what is delusion? And I know that sounds like maybe a simple question, but when you really think about how we know things, it it can get really tricky to know to think that we know things absolutely.
Right.
And
Right.
when we look at this country, for example, there's half of the people believe one thing and half of the people believe another thing. And I'm not even talking about like half the people believe that it's, racism is okay. I'm talking about like half of the people believe that like a totally different set of facts than what the other
Right.
country half of the country believes. Like,
Right.
um, think that, for example, and who knows what the facts actually are in these cases, but so like half the country believes that the Democratic Party, for example, is run by like corrupt pedophiles that are just trying to take over the whole country and absolute power with a deep state shadow government. And then the other half of the country is like, yeah, I don't know about that, but I still think this guy, the Trump and his crew, are like trying to destroy the democratic systems that are holding the power in check and become dictators. And the other half of the country is like, no, what are you talking about? Like they're just trying to fix they're trying to get rid of the deep state and fix the system. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It seems almost like we're living in two opposite realities,
Mm-hmm.
and from inside of one reality. Like I think you and I, we're sort of living in one of those realities. We're living in you could call it the liberal side or whatever. We both worked on the Bernie Sanders campaign, by the way. I'd heard about your work there. Yeah, I was knocking on doors.
Solidarity.
Yeah. So I mean, we both live in sort of that side of the bubble, and so that bubble in that part of the country. but like from each bubble, everybody inside of each bubble thinks that they're right. So how do we know that our bubble is right? How do we know that there's some, you know what I mean? Like, how do we know that the other bubble doesn't have wisdom and knowledge that we don't have?
Yeah, well, I mean, I believe that wisdom is available in all things. You know what I mean? And as my yogic and meditative practice have grown, like I have been able to harvest wisdom from some pretty ridiculous circumstances. Like most recently, in the context of my stroke recovery, I had a stroke a year ago, and I'm sure we'll talk about that at some point.
Oh, wow. I didn't
So
know.
yeah, so I had a stroke and almost died. And so like I've been able to harvest wisdom from a near-death experience. And it radically changed my relationship to humanity, but also my relationship to facts and love and those sorts of things. And here's what I mean by that. So to answer your question more explicitly, it's not that you can't learn something from someone else. However, what is true for me is anything that offers more love, connection, grace, peace, and understanding. Right? If it's a diminishing belief, if it causes separation, if it gives rise to marginalization of another group as opposed to people, I call myself a liberalitarian. You know what I mean? So very progressive ideals. And the function of the government should not be telling me what to do. It should be creating systems where we can be the best selves for ourselves and other people. So that's why I call myself a liberalitarian. But again, like I said, it's not that I don't believe that you can't learn from somebody else. I do believe, however, if one holds a worldview that holds someone lesser than someone else for any reason, that's not true. Like if you hold a belief for any reason which diminishes the connection of love and grace that we naturally share, all things being equal, that's not true. And if even though I think my ideas and my thoughts are in that vein, that's why meditation and yogic self-study are important, because for me, meditation is consistently either finding peace of mind and or reviewing the contents of my mind to see if what those contents are even true anymore. And I do believe things are true for a season. Here's what I mean by that. For example, like when I was younger, I was way more aggressive, way less kind to people. And I gave a retreat this weekend at Kripalu for Men of Color, and we were talking about these things. And I was like, I'm sorry for the way that I treated people during that phase of my life. And what my one colleague told me, he was like, give grace and gratitude for that person because they were just operating under the best information that they had at the time. Like, you know better. So, but you only know better because that person was doing the best that they could. So that's my thinking on that, and that you can learn something from anybody. However, what is true brings us closer together, allows for more harmony and connection, and creates conditions for all of us to thrive, not just a privileged few. How's that for a shout out to Bernie Sanders?
Yeah, that was great. And honestly, like what you're talking about also kind of, it takes it deeper, one level deeper from the policies and the specific policies, the specific ideas, the specific thoughts,
values
to values. Exactly. So that's something that I actually have probably written down on one of my million pieces of paper here that I write down on my little interview notes.
Yeah.
But they're all in a mess. I'm not even going to look at them right now. But values is something that we hold very deeply. Each of us holds very deeply. You and I think we share certain values. I think we share a lot of values, actually. Probably most of our core set of values is very similar from what I've heard from you and from our conversation now. But I think that those also, the set of values is sort of core to what gives rise to each of those sides of the country that I was mentioning before, the half that believes this and the half that believes that, and the value systems in the heart of each person kind of gives rise to which of those bubbles people end up sort of falling into.
Right.
And as much as it's hard to question our own values.
Yeah.
You mentioned before, you sort of have this process of metacognition, which is something I want to get into later, about like assessing your own thoughts, like the thoughts that go through. This is what I call critical thinking or metacognition. You're seeing the thoughts and you're saying, oh, is this real? Is this right?
Right.
Is this good? Is this true? And questioning them. And I wonder, should we even question our own values, not just our thoughts, not just our ideas, but even our values, to the point where we can say, these are my values. The other person that is in the other bubble seems to have these other values, which sometimes can seem extremely abhorrent to us, especially if we value our own values very deeply. Like, and the ones that you're talking about, I mean, growing up in the United States as an African American man, right? That's it's a really intense experience. I'm for a lot of people, not for everybody, but for a lot of people, it carries a lot of historical baggage from, like you said, this country was founded on the backs of slaves, basically. And maybe your ancestors were brought over here in slave ships. I don't know what your ancestors' stories were. Yeah. You have to deal with the kind of racism and injustice in this country, that maybe you've seen family members or yourself or subject to unjust circumstances.
Yeah.
And to grow up in that can, of course, give you a very strong lived experience of intense importance of your values, and your values being that any you expressed it before, any philosophy, any idea, any thought, or that diminishes one person by saying this type of person is less than this other type of person, or this person is less than this other person, that this is false. And that is a very strong value that you've developed, probably in large part because of the way that you grew up and because of your lived experience and your whole family and your ancestors and everything.
Yeah.
So and I have, I grew up Jewish. My grandmother's family was all killed in the Holocaust. Like, there's, I have my own kind of lived experience,
right.
that gives me similar values to you,
Right.
for probably similar reasons. And it's very hard to question those values, because it's like, of course, racism is wrong. Of course, anti-Semitism, for example, is wrong. Of course, these things are wrong. But that's because of the way we grew up. But then other people maybe have different experiences. And I find it very hard to even justify that someone else's value, if that goes against those very strongly, deeply held values that I have, could be justifiable in any way. Do you think that it's a good idea? I don't know. Like, I'm asking you, like, human to human here. Like, do you think it's a good idea to even try to question our own values, to even try to understand the values of others that are so different from our own? I'm trying to work through that right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the question becomes not questioning your values, but using values as a guidepost. And as you encounter life in each circumstance, do the values hold up? Right. So life has become, for me, a proving ground to test my beliefs and values in service to all beings. Right. So that's what yoga and meditation have become for me. And so I even entertain sometimes conversations with people I don't agree with, just to practice my values of non-separation. So that can often mean that, I believe it's possible to have conversations with people I deeply disagree with, so long as it's done in a respectful manner. If someone were to go off into left field, like spurting hatred towards me, I also hold a value of self-respect. So, like, if you and your values impact my personal safety and my mental well-being, especially since I had a stroke, like, there's certain levels of energy that I can't even entertain anymore. So if we disagree about something, but disagree agreeably, I'm into that. But if I disagree with someone, or someone disagrees with me, and it becomes them throwing their anger and their misinformation at me for the edification of their ego, nah, I'm all right.
Yeah. Yeah, and what you just mentioned about misinformation is also something I want to get into, because it's another thing that it becomes difficult to understand reality. But you were saying, you know, you're happy to have those conversations with people who have different values, as long as it's done in like a civil way where you can kind of talk to the person and understand each other.
Mm-hmm.
And what about when it's hard to even say this because people deny it, but like when you watch like Elon Musk talking about certain things, and he's like a really smart guy and he uses logic a lot. Um,
But he has
but
no
it
heart.
seems it well, I don't know about that. Don't know if I would go that far. I think he probably suppresses his own emotional and empathetic instincts in favor of what he logically believes. But I
Sure.
think he logically believes, and it's part of his value system. And it's really hard to say what somebody really believes or what somebody is thinking or what somebody's motivations are. But just based on observing for a long time, um, like he grew up in apartheid South Africa, you know, like or post-apartheid South Africa. Like he seems to have been affected by, there's sort of like the clash between the sort of African native people there versus the European descendant people that were living there. He seems to have been affected by that in a way that has given him some kind of idea or belief that there is sort of like a fundamental difference between the races, or maybe he's just seeing it as like that there's going to be that anything that tries to rectify racial systemic injustices or whatever, any like, you know, the fixing of apartheid and the post-apartheid you know, measures that they took to try to fix the systems there. He seems to have some kind of belief that there is something like deeply wrong with that, like that there's something deeply wrong with like trying to fix it
Yeah,
based on.
I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier with respect to, so the facts of apartheid South Africa are that 7% of the country ruled 93%.
Mm.
And that 7% controlled nearly everything. And the 93% had nothing. So if your worldview and the worldview of your parents was disrupted by those who have nothing getting something, then in that zero-sum game, you lose, when in fact, you're not really losing that much because you had everything to begin with. And let me just refine my remarks when I said he doesn't have heart. Like anyone who says empathy is a sin, that's not a heart practice for me.
Well,
You know,
you know, I've actually, when I was talking to Marianne Williamson a few weeks ago, she was saying that Elon said that there was like empathy was the biggest weakness of the West, and you know, when she quoted that, I wanted to interject, but she kept talking, so I didn't interject.
yeah,
But like, you know, I try to listen to people that I disagree with more than actually I listen to people that I agree with, because I feel like then I try to understand what I'm
sure.
missing, my blind spots, and other people. And one thing that I've seen Elon misquoted in that way. I think that his most clear quote on empathy that I've heard was more like, there's like shallow empathy and deep empathy. And shallow empathy is, you know, having empathy for one particular person. And I don't necessarily agree with this, but he said shallow empathy to him is empathy for one particular person, but missing on the bigger, broader context of what that empathy is doing, like, and versus having empathy for everyone. So like he was saying this in the
Yeah.
context of, for example, having empathy for
Philosophically,
criminals, you know, where you're not having empathy for their victims. So I don't
sure.
think he's against empathy. I think he's just trying to implement it in a way that is like bigger picture.
Yeah, and again, like, so I can't speak to what he may or may not have said in detail, but I know that he did say empathy was what was a weakness in the West, and in the circles that I operate in, like empathy for our shared suffering is a requirement in order to have any level of connection, service, and liberation for the masses. So and that requires you to live here. in your heart space, not in the space of logic. Right. So when I say he has no heart, it's based on the rendering of a logical analysis of a heartfelt concept, like that's incongruous to me. So I pray in all of my prayers that those who seem to be causing suffering, may they be healed from their suffering so that none of us can suffer. You know what I mean? So like, it's clear that there's some level of suffering that many people hold. All of us hold some level of suffering. Not all of us are truthful about it. So in the context of what he holds against pre-apartheid or post-apartheid South Africa, there's no denying that, for instance, that Nelson Mandela was in prison for 27 years because of his political beliefs, which were rooted in the equality of all beings, especially suppressed Africans over the Afrikaans. And anything short of, in my mind, honoring the dignity that must exist for all beings to see one another as connected, anything that goes against that, I have a hard time with, because again, my meditation and yogic practice requires me to hold a big heart and then use my mind to discern how I hold my big heart. So when I talk about confronting my values or my thoughts, like, do I have a limiting thought that keeps me from having a big enough heart to understand the plight of suffering of all beings, even those I disagree with?
Yeah, I really like your heart and mind sort of way of thinking about it, and I've had that sort of thought before that these two bubbles in this country, it's sort of heart versus mind.
Totally.
Like you could think of it even in the political spectrum, like left being heart, right being mind. Though I don't think that means that the people on the right have more logic than the people on the left, because I think that someone like Bernie Sanders, for example, has much more empirical evidence for his
Sure.
policies than most of the people on the right do. But still, it's like a favoring of love is the foundation of sort of the left way of thinking and way of being,
Sure. Yeah.
and the favoring of like mind over emotion, sort of
Right.
logic over emotion is sort of like the foundation of the right. And you can see that in the way that the policies are being implemented right now with heartless kinds of deportation policies and
Healthcare
DEI.
cuts.
And yeah, exactly. In favor of a philosophy that if you cut the taxes for the rich, then this will attract more rich people to the country, and there will be more productivity and all that stuff.
Which is never
Which
born true.
Right, which doesn't seem to have that much empirical evidence, but I don't know. That's a different question. But the heart and the mind as these two ways of being, you and I seem to be attracted to this heart-centered way of being, and others seem to be attracted to the mind-centered way of being. And I'll tell you, actually, before, when I was young, I was more attracted to the mind-centered. I think in college, like I smoked a lot of weed and I did some psychedelics, and then that somehow my mind got changed to being more of a heart-centered thing. And maybe your stroke, I don't know, maybe it had some effect on that as well. I don't know. I want to get
Sure.
into that in a few minutes.
Yeah, totally.
But and I know, like Ram Dass, when he had his stroke, he started talking more about love and stuff like that afterward. I
Totally.
can see how that would work. But so as growing up, I was this mind centered. Then I did a bunch of drugs and I got heart centered. I still have a lot of family members that are very mind centered, and they have this way of thinking of, like, don't let your emotions get in the way of your logic. And I guess it's still that same question of, do I trust myself enough to be able to say that others are wrong and that I am right in this, and that people should be heart-centered rather than mind-centered? And you know what I mean? Rather than saying, I'm heart-centered and that's how I'm feeling. And maybe that will shift and evolve over time. I don't know. And
Yeah.
this other person is mind-centered and that's how they're thinking and feeling. And instead of invalidating and saying that this is wrong, I could say, okay, that's how you're thinking. That's okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I appreciate that distinction because we you can't force anyone to do anything that they're not ready for, right? To try and perpetuate your way of being on someone else and they're not ready for it, in a spiritual sense, is harm, right? And one of the spiritual tenets that I uphold is non-harm, and that means you ain't gonna force someone to do something they don't want to do. So, what I've come to believe and come to practice now is that I'm fully aware that, especially since the stroke, not everyone is here for the same purpose as I am. The stroke was a very transformative experience. And I joke with folks, I was like, if I had 9 lives before the stroke, I've got 7 now. So, like, I don't have the same tally of lives. Or I said to someone recently when they were like, live a little, have dessert. I was like, I do not have the physiological luxury of excess sugar in my body. So not all of us are here for the same reason. So I will be called into account for what I believe I'm here to do. I believe I'm here to hold critical, important conversations, sometimes difficult conversations, with a loving heart so people can see opportunities for growth, connection, and liberation until I'm not here anymore. So, and that's not what, that's not what other people are here to do. So I spend less time worrying about what other people are here to do and more time creating ways and opportunities for me to do what I'm here to do. So right now I was talking to you, Kevin, or like this past weekend at Kripalu, I had 15 gongs and played the hell out of these gongs. And people were just like, oh my goodness, I feel peaceful. You now understand what peace feels like. So when the world is chaotic, if words aren't doing it for you, maybe the wisdom of sound can. So I'm here in this shape to speak loving truth, play music, and have cool conversations. Other people ain't here for that. So, like, rather than waste my finite resources on worrying about what other people aren't doing that I think they should do, I need to spend all the time doing what I know I should do. And that's
that's good. I mean, I obviously am doing the same thing, making a meditation magazine to try to help make the, people happier and more peaceful in this world and create a better world.
Tools. Yeah, give them tools.
Yeah, exactly. And to me, that seems like a good way to help. It's always seemed like a good way to help. It's actually, it's the thing that I realized is the best thing that I can do to help. But then I think about, so this is one of those things that I grew up with when I was in elementary school. I was in like a Jewish elementary school, and the rabbis and all the people, they always taught about what happened to our grandparents. Like, I was a kid, they were teaching about what happened in, when they were young and when their parents were young, what happened in Germany. And they always said this very specific thing. They said, all that's needed for evil to triumph is for good men to sit by and
stay silent. Yeah, right.
Exactly. So basically, when they talked about that, that gave me a very strong sense of values of you need to stand up for what's right. And they all, those rabbis and teachers, they always said this. They said, you think that can't happen here? It seems like it can't, but that's what they thought in Germany. That's what they thought in Germany, and it can happen anywhere. And they were talking about this in the context of people coming after Jewish people, but the truth is it can happen to others also. Mexican people, Venezuelan people, African American people. It can, in this country, it can happen to anybody, in any minority. And right now, it doesn't seem like the Jews are under attack in this country. It's more of the Mexican and Venezuelan people right now that are suffering from the current administration. Obviously, not to the scale of what happened in Germany, but the sort of the question is like, when do you start? 4 months. when do you start taking action on this? When do you start standing up? And the question, if you believe your own thoughts and values very strongly, if I believe my own thoughts and values very strongly, then the answer is start standing up right away. You start standing up immediately. Yeah. So, and then it's like, hey, let's protest this immediately. Right. But then if you don't fully believe your own thoughts and values, then it becomes a little more confusing about when to take action. Totally. So, right. So like, here's something that happened to me that sort of threw me off of believing my own thoughts about situations. For the whole Trump first term, I thought this guy's like a crazy asshole who's very selfish and he's just trying to take power for himself.
He's not crazy.
Yeah. Right. Maybe. Okay. Well, crazy in a certain way. You know what I mean? Maybe like sociopath type of crazy. Then for Biden's term, I thought, okay, at least we got somebody who's like a compassionate guy. He might not be fully with it, but at least he's like, he cares and he's trying to do good stuff.
Right.
Okay. Toward the end of after that debate with Biden, when Biden was clearly not with it, then I was like, that's weird. People were saying he was with it and he's not really with it. Okay. And then after that, the media kept kind of pushing that he was with it. I was like, okay, that's weird also. Then there was Elon jumping in saying, hey, like, I'm smart and I like this guy Trump, even though he seems like he's, to me, he seems like he's only what smart people would support this guy. But then there's like one of the smartest people in the world is supporting this guy. So, okay, that's strange. But then there was something that really, really got my attention, which was when, I don't know if you remember this, there was a media cycle before the election where everyone was saying that Trump said that if he lost, it would be a bloodbath. Do you remember that?
I do.
Like, yeah, if I lose, it's going to be a bloodbath. This was all over CNN, MSNBC, all these places, and that I had trusted. And then even Kamala and Obama, both of them also, I voted for both of them. Including in the last election cycle, I voted for Kamala. But they both were getting up on the stages and they were saying the same thing. Trump said it's going to be a bloodbath if he loses. He's trying to be a dictator. And then when Trump went on Joe Rogan, which I try to watch to be able to get understanding of other people's perspectives. When Trump went on Joe Rogan, he's like, yeah, look at how the media misrepresents what I say. It's like I'm saying it's going to be a bloodbath because I'm trying to be a dictator. Like, literally, if you watch the video, I was talking about the Japanese auto industry beating the American auto industry, and it would be a bloodbath for the American auto industry if I don't implement tariffs. And I was like, well, that sounds very different from what the people are reporting on these media stations. And I was like, okay, let's check the video. And I went and I watched the video of his speech. It took 30 seconds to see that that's what he was talking about. He wasn't talking about insurrection. He was talking about the auto industry and tariffs. And I was like, huh. And I was like, okay, so I'm actually watching propaganda. Like, if I'm watching CNN, if I'm watching MSNBC, I'm actually watching propaganda. And then after that incident, after Joe Rogan interviewed Trump, and it was very clear that he said, anybody who watched that, it was very clear that that this was a propaganda line. I was watching Obama and Kamala get up on stages and say the same thing, even after Trump had clarified it on Joe Rogan to like 10, 20 million people or whatever. And I was like, huh, like, they're still saying this. Do they not know that this is not true? Like, they must know. They must know that it's not true, or they don't, and they're being, puppets of someone who knows that it's not true, but just using them for the propaganda. So when I started seeing that, I was just starting to be like, okay, like, there's more propaganda than I realized. It's not just a one-sided propaganda. It's not just like Fox News propaganda and the rest of them are good. It's like, okay, all of them are kind of propaganda. And if you look at social media, our bubbles that we get into are also kind of propaganda bubbles, because the algorithm just shows us what we want to see. So it is only showing us one side of the story. So I think that is really what threw me off. It's that, and then seeing a bunch of other stuff similar to that, where it was like clear that things are being misrepresented. Every time I see a headline and I really dig into it, if it's like, oh, the other day I saw Elon goes off on this reporter and calls her an NPC and says that she's not thinking for herself and he's petulant in the interview. I watched the whole interview and it wasn't like that. Right. And I was like, it's just all these media outlets are just clearly have an agenda and are clearly presenting biased reporting. And it's like, if that's the case, and all this stuff that I've been hearing for years and decades of my life has been essentially misreported to the extent that it's like painting a picture of reality that's not really real, then how do I know that what I'm standing up and opposing, and the people that I'm going out and protesting against, how do I know that those people are really the evil caricatures that have been painted for me.
Yeah,
How do
I
I
can
know that,
say,
you know what I
yeah,
mean?
I can say in the incidents of the president, as it pertains to racial superiority and those sorts of things, like he has a track record in that. Like the Central Park Five, among other things, and he and his father were slumlords in respect to how they treated African American tenants and those sorts of things. So, and that's the thing that makes it tricky. So there are some instances where the president says the truth. Then there are other instances where he'll say something to try to get a response, and then if the response doesn't go the way he wants to, he'll say, "What I meant was this," right? So it's a psychological device where I'm gonna try this, and if that doesn't work, I'm gonna say this. So it leaves people in this space of like, what's really true? So to answer, I guess the deeper question is like, how do we see through clouds of propaganda? Like that requires knowledge of self and consistent review of, is what I'm seeing and hearing consistent with what I consider to be my worldview? Right. So for me, because I've spent years in the political apparatus, but am a registered independent.
Yeah, just like Bernie, right?
Yeah, I'm a registered independent, like because I see that in our current system, the way for me to affect change at a scale is to be aligned here, where it makes sense. Where it doesn't make sense, I'm not aligned there. So I think the reason that propaganda is successful is because we view things in an all or nothing way, as opposed to seeing that in many instances there's some truth here and some truth here, in terms of just like not capital T truth, but people are saying like 85% here or 70% here or those sorts of things, which can be a bit disorienting. However, for me in my meditation, and so I'll give you an example, because one of the questions you asked me was, how do I sift through propaganda? Like when I have a conversation and or do something political and this has definitely been since the stroke, I'll play sound bowls or gongs, and then I'll ask a question: how does this sit with me now? And I'll ask the question: how does this sit with me now? And quite literally, if it doesn't ring true, then I'm like, I don't know if I can subscribe to that. But if it does ring true, I'm like, okay, this is based on the information that I have. I'm going to make this decision and go forward this way.
Yeah, based on the information I have, right? Yeah,
right.
I know what you mean. And like, if it doesn't ring true, we don't need to subscribe to something. Like for me, I can state, I believe XYZ. I believe the separation of families in deportations is wrong. Like I believe that these anti-DEI policies is wrong. Like I believe, that we should have, all those DEI policies and more. Like I believe, I can say, I can state my beliefs, but then, and I actually don't have like a worry doing that. I don't have a hesitancy doing that. What I have hesitancy in is standing up against people that have different beliefs than me, because I can't definitively say I'm right and you're wrong. And not because I haven't done the research, but because everybody's got their own mind, and I feel like it's arrogant of me to say that, oh, my thing is obviously more right than yours. And I think that's where it comes. Like, for example, I as a magazine publisher, as a media person, as somebody that posts on social media, obviously I've posted about, whenever I post about something controversial, if I'm speaking my mind or whatever, there's always people that are haters in the comments, right?
Yeah,
and
sure.
that's okay. But
right.
I don't like that feeling of speaking my mind and somebody is being a hater and saying that I'm wrong or I'm bad or something like that.
Yeah.
That doesn't feel good. So when I think about standing up and saying, hey, you know, Trump is trying to take over the country and he's like trying to become a dictator and trying to create fascism in this country because he's like corrupt and he's like you know, trying to say this. When I think about saying things like that publicly, I mean, I can say it that seems like that to me.
Mm-hmm.
But to go out to the extent of, you know, protesting and say this is what's happening when I don't have full certainty of that
Mm-hmm.
is hard for me to do. And I wonder, like, do you think that we should take those types of actions, even if they're intense and oppositional and adversarial, even if we don't feel full certainty, even if we feel like slightly uncertain, but still have an intuition or a feeling that something is wrong, we should still act against it? You know what I mean?
I believe that if, and this is part and parcel of the merging of my activist and spiritual practices. So if something does not seem just to you, you should speak about it. And that may ruffle feathers. And the other thing too is you may change your opinion later. But if something feels unjust to you in the moment and you don't speak it, you don't create conditions for your own liberation. You know, part of liberation is an act of expression. And, you know, for instance, when I was a political operative, I thought it was wise to work 20 hours a day and drink bourbon and mango juice for breakfast and then chain smoke Parliament lights for lunch. I thought that was how you were to do your job on the campaign trail. I was wrong. But then I didn't think I was wrong. So now I can look back on that old situation with new eyes and have compassion for the guy who was doing the best he could with incomplete information. Then when life lifed, and, you know, I give gratitude for the resilience of my body, especially in the context of my stroke recovery. Like, I now know a higher wisdom that's deeper than what I thought was right.
Yeah. I think that that's why a lot of people in the meditation community, you know, like you were talking about at the beginning, that they don't want to have an opinion, they don't want to be non-dual, is because they don't want to be
Human.
wrong. Yeah, well, I think it's don't want to be wrong. I think it's don't want to be wrong in a way
That's part of the human
where,
experience, though.
yeah. It's true. I think we in the meditation community, we have that metacognition that you were talking about, analyzing our thoughts, critically thinking, and that leads to actually less certainty than when you don't do it. You know, like
Right.
if people who don't have that process
Yeah.
of critical thinking and metacognition, and they don't do that, instead they look for evidence to support their views rather than to refute them.
Right.
The people that look for evidence to support their views rather than refute them tend to be very certain. It's like, I know everything. I did all my own research. You got to do your own research and find all these things that I found. You know, and like and discard everything else because that's obviously fake. The people that have that thought process of being of trying to support their own views have this very strong sense of certainty. Actually, and I think that is very much in that thinking bubble, in the thought side bubble, the logic side bubble. They try to find the things that support their logic, and then in the other side of the bubble, there's a lot more critical thinking. I think, and like I don't want to say liberal people are always critical thinking, but at least, you know, there's probably more of that on that side, and metacognition of trying to see if your own thoughts are correct. And yeah, I don't know. I told you I had a cold and I've lost the train of thought there.
Yeah,
I
definitely no
lost my
worries.
train of thought. Oh yeah, but I remember now. It's the people who are
Mm.
meditating. The people who are meditating are having more of that metacognition and therefore less of the certainty. And I think that there's, you know, there's like books like Beginner's Mind.
Yeah,
Like realizing that we don't
I
really
teach that.
know anything, to have beginner's mind rather than expert's mind.
Right.
In beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, and expert's mind, there are few.
Right.
So when we are in this meditation where we meditate and we have this metacognition that makes us realize that we don't really know anything, and that's those people that are saying, yeah, I'm not sure, I don't know, I don't want to take an opinion, I don't want to take a position, I don't want to take a side. And I feel that. And I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense that, sometimes we just got to make mistakes and just do the best that we can with the information that we have, because, you can't just not do anything. You can't just sit by idly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Life is so precious and such a gift that to not get all you can out of this experience because you don't want to be wrong is a waste of the gift of life. You know what I mean? Like, I would not wish having a stroke on anybody, but the blessing of having a stroke and navigating the ups and downs of recovery and using sonic meditation and like chanting and other ways of meditation as my therapy, in addition to medication and acupuncture, like the blessing of having to learn how to walk again shows me that I knew nothing about the resilience of my body. Shows me I thought I knew something when I was meditating, but I did not know that my consistent meditation practice laid the foundation for me to, when I was having the stroke, to approach my stroke with a calm mind. Like, oh, a stroke is happening to the body, as opposed to, oh my God, totally freaking out. Like the level of peace, Kevin, that I had when I could feel myself having a stroke is unfathomable. But it's because of my consistent practice, right? It's because like I think meditators get lost in the mind and don't realize that meditation is a tool to refine the mind to focus on what it thinks about. Right? It's not a tool to keep the mind from thinking. It's a tool to focus the mind in a manner that creates connection to unlimited consciousness, right? And in so doing, for me anyway, my connection to unlimited consciousness mandates that I create conditions for other people to have a similar experience.
Yeah. I want to ask you a little bit more about your stroke in a moment. I think that's what I want to wrap up with, because I think it will be an interesting story, and we'll have like a little bit of depth to get into.
Totally.
But before that, I think the last question I wanted to ask you about was whether you think that the current moment that we're living through in the United States is like a critical moment in terms of the democracy of the country possibly being lost in the way that it was in other countries like Cuba and Venezuela and Russia. They shifted from one kind of authoritarian dictatorial type of thing to another, but someone like Putin just not going to give up power. There's fake elections that are not real, and same thing in Venezuela and Cuba. They don't even pretend to have elections, I guess. But so that is something I'm very worried about. And Marianne Williamson was like, that's what's happening right now, basically, and we need to fight, to stop that from happening. And if that is really happening, I feel like I need to sort of focus the magazine on that, the next issue on that, and like avoiding, dictatorship, like maintaining freedom and democracy. But if that is maybe just overblown by the media, and it's not really the case of what's happening, then maybe I would focus the magazine for this year on something like more like unity, or like, things like that, understanding, So what do you think? Do you think that we are in that like a falling apart moment?
Yes. But I believe that just because things fall apart don't mean you can't put them back together. You know what I mean? I do believe that I personally disagree with many of the policy decisions of people being fired for under the auspices of removing fraud and abuse, when in fact, in many ways, it's just to enrich the pockets of rich donors. So I disagree with that. However, what has also manifested in this moment of things falling apart are that we see the resiliency of the court system. Like we see the resiliency of the human experience. There are people who are getting politically engaged who've never done so before. So what I'm excited about as an operative, but also as a spiritual teacher, is that you know who the highest performing demographic in the 2024 election was? Did not vote.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. So did not vote cast more ballots than for Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. So if did not vote If that number gets smaller because of this, as a former civics teacher, that it sucks that we had to go through this. But if the end is that more people are engaged and stand up for what we collectively believe, then it's what we had to go through. And I liken that to my stroke. Like, my stroke forced me to deal with things that I was avoiding. It put hard truths in my face. I couldn't walk. You know what I mean? Like, I had temporary paralysis, now temporary paralysis in my left leg and left foot. So I had to learn how to walk again at 49 years old. So, but do you know what that experience gave me? It gave me deep compassion for a person in a physical therapy unit that is perched over a walker and looking down at the ground, like wondering, where am I going to find the strength to take that next step? I would not have the depth of that compassion if I did not go through what I went through. I have an understanding of the resilience of our physiology and our neurology. You know, part of it is because of the sound that I played. Part of it is because of the deep meditation I did before and after. So in the terrible experience of having a stroke and like being in you know, my blood pressure went to 265 over 180. Like, it was ridiculous. I saw the eyes of the emergency room doctor light up, and I was like, you see death all the time and you have the oh shit face looking at me. Oh my God. So like, to have that level of a surreal experience related to my own lived experience has given me an opportunity to appreciate the beauty of resilience, to see a storm of things that you cannot stand. I had to choose to walk again. I had to choose to like make better dietary choices. Like, I had to choose to talk very openly. One of the things that's not common from the teaching perspective, but that I chose as a centerpiece of my recovery is, Kevin, I put it all on social media. I put pictures of me in a walker on social media. It's like, yes, your teacher can't walk. Take your ass to the doctor. You know what I mean? So like, me being honest about the disgusting nature of the pain that I was experiencing allowed for other people to stop thinking and feel. So I had more impact as a teacher through dealing with my own heartbreak and things falling apart, so that when I put things back together, it didn't just help me, it helped thousands of other people.
Yeah. I never had a stroke, thankfully, but yeah, I've had like similar experience. Like, I got in a motorcycle accident in Thailand when I was 25, and I broke my neck. And I had to, I also, like, I woke up on the ground, not being able to move, and I had to, they fused the vertebrae, and I ended up having to
changes things.
relearn to walk. This was soon after a Buddhist monastery. I also remember having that kind of equanimity that you're talking about, where I had like, you know, just I was just like laying in a hospital bed, and I was like, okay, I'm laying in a hospital bed now, like looking around.
Right.
And maybe it was the morphine.
Wow.
Maybe the morphine helped. I don't know. But it was it was intense. It definitely gave me more compassion for people, and people who are injured, and people who go through things like that. It can be very like, it's hard to understand what it's like.
Totally.
But I've also so I think a stroke is a little different, because your mind is taken in a way that it's very difficult to describe, maybe to people who have not experienced that. And I obviously I've never experienced it. I've understood what Ram Dass was talking about. Ram Dass kind of described it a little bit. My grandfather had one. I saw what happened to his mind. And did you find your mind sort of becoming different, your consciousness becoming different during the stroke?
Yeah. So two things I'll say about that. One is, as the stroke was happening, I was able to witness myself having the stroke. So as opposed to being like, I was like, oh, we are experiencing a stroke. Here's how we get out of it. You know, so I played a sound bowl. Like, very long story short, April 1st, 2024, I'm in Columbia, South Carolina, on the way to a wedding in Georgia for a friend of mine and my girlfriend. I go to the bathroom, come back, fall on the floor, and leg just goes out. And I try to move the leg. and it doesn't move, and I'm like, oh, we're having a stroke. So then call out to my girlfriend in a manner that got her attention but did not alarm her. So how in the hell am I so present with a ridiculous thing happening to me to call out to her, wake her up in a way that gets her ready to move? Crazy, you know?
Yes, the practice, the meditation practice, it gets you prepared to be present in those moments.
Absolutely. So to be that radically present, not just for the stroke, but after the stroke, when I'm in total devastation in South Carolina, so nowhere near home, and you know, who's going to pay? Like all the questions are coming, and I'm paralyzed from the leg. From like my leg was barely working, below the knee was not working, and I got to chill and like make sense of this. Meditation helped with that. And meditation allowed me to answer your question more explicitly. When the ups and the downs were coming, you know, you need to get this before you get discharged, and I really want to get out and all these other things, I shifted my mind to focus on the following. Rather than view myself as a victim, like the pedagogy of my recovery has been the following. Like, how is this happening for me as opposed to why is this happening to me? So the stroke became a teacher. The stroke became an initiation to higher levels of sensitivity about the body. The stroke became an initiation to deeper love for self that did not exist prior to. And the last thing I'll say is that my consciousness shifted because I was able to see myself more objectively. So in the depths of that expansion, I was able to look and see deeply held beliefs that I didn't need anymore. For instance, I didn't want to tell anybody about the stroke, but I was questioning myself, was just like, so is that out of fear or is that out of love? Because if it's out of love, it wouldn't be this constricting. So you're afraid of being open, and that's cool, but you don't have the energy to invest in that. You only have the energy to invest in release and expansion. So I started to share. And then I found another thing when I was looking underneath the hood is that when I would share, and Kevin, it blew my mind, like thousands upon thousands of people responded. I had a hard time dealing with that. I was just like, because I grew up, especially as a person of color in the United States, you know, we got to work 4 times as hard to get half the credit. And so I did not trust that people's genuine heartfelt expression to me was real. And so I had to check that out. I was like, so, okay, brain, why are you having such a difficult time accepting this genuine love from people? You don't have the energy to reject this. So are you rejecting it out of fear? Or are you rejecting it out of love? And I was rejecting it out of fear. And so like me, that self-study, that metacognition we've been talking about, I noticed 2 distinct ways that I could push through and not only expand my connection to consciousness, but by proxy, expand my connection to other people.
Yeah. That's a very powerful experience. Obviously, maybe something that we hope that nobody has to go through, but it's nice that you were able to do it, to take it as, what is this doing for me rather than why is this happening to me? You know, something that's a really powerful perspective. And I want to, do you have like 3 or 4 more minutes? I had one other question that came up in my mind that I had written down earlier. So with all the misinformation that we get on social media, on the mainstream media, with all the propaganda and all that, and becomes very hard to see. And with the rise of AI right now, I don't know if have you seen these new videos from VO3, the new video maker from Google, the AI video maker? It just came out like 4 days ago. People are making, like, it looks like, you know, interviews with people. It just looks like completely real. You would never guess it was AI generated video. That's going to make things so much harder to know what's real in the future. Like if I went and watched the video of Trump talking about the tariffs now, I would not know. Is that even real? Is that a
Right.
fake video from AI? So with all that, it seems like people who are not there in Washington, D.C., on Capitol Hill, don't get a view of really what's going on except through these media that we don't know if we can even trust. So my question to you is, like, with your work on Capitol Hill,
Yeah.
with your work with politicians, I think you're mostly working with progressive politicians, as far as I understand.
I try to.
Yeah, are you finding that it's giving you a clearer picture of what's actually real than what you see in the media?
Yes, but I'm not going to answer it in the way that you expect. And here's what I mean by that. So, what all of this has shown me is that we don't have political problems in the United States. We have spiritual problems. So, what's real and true to me now is not an ideological or a policy debate. It's just some people seem to lack compassion. Some people seem to lack courage. Some people seem to lack discernment. And this is because I have a completely different worldview given like my proximity in stroke recovery. So I feel obligated now to create conditions for spiritual growth, not political gain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Are you seeing those lack of compassion, lack of courage, all that stuff? Are you seeing that because of seeing what the politicians are like when you're working with them? And
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of fear. You know what I mean? So,
Mm.
for instance, in the current circumstance where they're trying to pass a budget which guts Medicaid, I see constituents calling members of Congress saying, "Don't cut this. I need this to stay alive."
Mm.
And they still vote against it. That's a lack of compassion. If people in your district who you are sworn to serve are saying, "Please don't do this," and you do it anyway, that's a lack of compassion. Right.
And you're seeing that happening because you're there. You're able to see the people that you're working with.
Yeah, I see and or read reports about the numbers of calls being sent to people's offices, so certain numbers of calls go to these offices and the member votes a certain way. So people are calling against this and you vote for it. Right. So that's a lack of
And they do
compassion.
that. Why? They do that because they think that they have to in order to stay in power.
I can't speak to that. I mean, it may be that. It may be I think there's there's fear there. Like, if I do the right thing, how will I be punished? And on the other side, there are folks who are afraid, and their fear creates them. I'll end by saying this by how meditation has shifted my activism. So what I try and do now as an activist and as a teacher, I mean, because I teach a lot of political folks, but I do a lot of stuff in spiritual communities as well. And everything I do, Kevin, is under the following guise. I once had a guy tell me once, he's like, "Reggie, you're a great student, great teacher, but I want to talk to you about your activism." And so, of course, ego was just like, "What do you mean you want to talk about it?" And then I was like, "Okay, calm down, dial it back," because I had just gotten out of impeachment fights, whatever. And he was like, "Reggie, so would you consider the following take?" I'm like, "I'm listening." He was like, "What if you tried your activism, instead of it being a fight, that it was a creative process?" And I was like, "Okay, tell me more." He was like, "More people will be attracted to a party than a fight. So how might you create conditions of social transformation that are compelling, that draw people forward, as opposed to shame them?" And I was just like,
yeah. Yeah.
What? So, Kevin, ever since then, like, my activism has been like that. It's like, I'm not going to force you. I'm not going to shame you in anything. I'm going to create something that's so dope and so different and so like loving and like comically sparkly irreverent that you're going to
Mm.
be like, what's that? You may not join me forever, but I'll get your attention. And like
Mm.
in me getting your attention, you know, because everything is an attack on someone's mind or attention these days. If I can get your attention and create a compelling case while I have your attention, that's all I need to do. I don't need to force you to do anything. I just need to get your attention.
Yeah. All right. I love that. That's a perfect way to end this conversation. And honestly, I there's one of the most compelling things that I've heard in terms of how we're going to create the thesis of this next issue, in terms of like how do we like be activists and, you know, at the same time not be, you know,
Jerks.
jerks, creating conflict when there doesn't need to be conflict. What you just said was so perfect in encapsulating it. So comically sparkly, I forgot the exact words that you used, but
Yeah.
it's wonderful, super dope. I love it, and it's gonna be, I think that's what we're gonna do with this next issue. We're gonna do something like that, and I'm gonna contemplate it. I'm gonna contemplate our conversation as I do with all of these interviews, and it's going to imbue this coming issue with wisdom, with your wisdom and the wisdom of all the other people that I'm talking to. It's gonna be epic. So
Well,
thank you so much for talking to me.
However I can be of service, holler at me, and thank you so much for the chance to connect, man.
Yeah, you too. All right. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.